Hello and welcome to Informed Dissent. I'm Lauren and this is your news of the week for the week of April 4th, 2026. Independent journalist Benjamin Ryan published private WPATH and USPATH conference videos this week in Compact magazine. Footage not meant for public consumption. What they capture is a field that watched Europe restrict these interventions and decided the appropriate response was to accelerate. Ben will slowly be releasing more videos in the weeks ahead. Today, we will be discussing one of those videos in our deep dive. Speaking of things that shouldn't need to be said out loud, attorney Kara Dansky published a piece in The Hill this week that opens with a sentence she had to write in an actual federal amicus brief: "Women don't have penises." She wrote it in the Olympus spa case, a Korean women's spa near Seattle where nudity is required. Girls as young as 13 are present, and Washington state law now says that the spa must admit males who identify as women. The Ninth Circuit agreed. A Supreme Court petition is expected, and we will be following that. The Supreme Court ruled 8-1 in Chiles versus Salazar that Colorado's conversion therapy ban violated the First Amendment. And we want to be very careful how we say this because many LGBT people, this issue is not abstract. Coercive practices targeting same-sex attracted youth have caused real harm, and that history matters. What the court actually ruled is narrower than the headlines suggest. It did not endorse any specific practice. What it says is that Colorado cannot permit therapists to affirm a minor's gender identity or sexual orientation while prohibiting them from helping a minor who wants to explore changing it. That's viewpoint discrimination, and the First Amendment forbids it. The tools against abuse, coercion, and fraud remain intact. What the state lost is the power to decide which direction a conversation is allowed to go. More than 20 states have similar laws. The implications will take time to work out, and we will be watching and discussing in the future. Today, we're joined by Kevin Kellar, a trial lawyer with 30 years of experience in large loss tort and complex litigation, who consults nationally on medicalized gender intervention cases. That's your news of the week. And now, on to the show.
Hello, and welcome to Informed Dissent for April the 4th. I am Jamie Reed, whistleblower from a pediatric gender center, with my two lovely co-hosts.
Hi, I'm Cori Cohn. I'm the lovelier co-host because I don't pull faces when I'm introduced.
And I'm Lauren Leggieri, co-host extraordinaire.
Oh, Lord. Okay. Before we get started on this week's topic, I think that there are a couple housekeeping items we should take care of from last week. Oh, and a quick warning. Yet again, there is a child in our midst.
In your mitts.
How do you spell that word?
MITTS.
Oh, okay. Not M. Anyway.
No, I don't think that's correct.
I heard her say it.
I don't think it's in your mitts. It's not in your mitts. It's in your midst, which I still don't know how to spell because I'm dyslexic, but I know it's not the same word.
Lauren, what you just said, that's spelled MITTSTS. Mitts.
Look, and I can't comment on how anything is spelled. I'm not good at that, but I do know that they're two different words.
Okay, let me just tell you, just briefly, there is a child here because, Cori, I'm just going to tell you this brief story. I get a phone call yesterday from the daycare that says your child threw up promptly after lunch. Oh, and by the way, so did most of the other kids in the classroom. I said, gee, that sure sounds like food poisoning. And they said, no way. It's got to be a virus that just managed to pop up
at the exact same time.
Norovirus.
You have to come get your child. And so I went and got the child, brought him home. He managed to vomit all over the front mat outside the door. And then hasn't thrown up again since and ate all of his dinner. But he's at home.
Trying to recreate that scene from Stand By Me.
Oh, I don't know that scene.
It's frequently referenced on Tumblr.
Oh, okay, yes. So he is here. He chose to watch Drama Llama instead of Period Panda. So
That's our names for the Emperor's New Clothes and Turning Red.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Yes. If there's any other parents that listen.
They'll know what we're talking about.
Yeah, Drama Llama and Period Panda. Those are your two choices today. Anyway, last week, first of all, Cori, are you still staying clean off of X?
Yeah. There is a website called knitter.net. Have you heard of this?
Oh Lord.
NITTER.net.
No.
Well, it allows you to type in the name of some account on X and it gives you a update about their feed. So every once in a while, every couple days, I'll go into knitter.net and put in the names of some of the drama accounts just to see what is up. I gotta tell you. Can I tell you an anecdote?
So you're clean like someone on methadone is clean.
Yeah, this is methadone. Knitter is
Yeah.
methadone.
Twitter methadone. Great.
There's a transgender influencer called Brianna Wu.
Oh my God.
Okay. Yes,
And
we're familiar.
um, yesterday, Brianna Wu posted this. I don't have it up to read. I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to characterize it, which is today's a very difficult day because I'm going to be in the hospital almost all day because I have learned that breast cancer runs in my family and I'm taking all of the steps necessary to ensure that breast cancer does not strike me down like it did my mother. And this generated a lot of positive reinforcement for Mr. Wu, which I would say if you are not a uterus haver, if you're a breast haver, you should maybe check in on those once in a while, but I would not encourage men to do engagement farming for mammograms.
I
Pasties.
I might have to fact check you here.
NITTER.net.
No, I actually read the post, but I
Oh,
actually do think that men who are on estrogen do have higher rates of cancer risks, especially with some of the older versions of estrogen.
yes.
So this is interesting because his risk would potentially, this is a great question. I'm going to actually reach out to a couple MDs that I know. Is the risk higher if you have, he's claiming he has the genes, the BRCA or whatever genes he's claiming.
Right.
He's claiming he just found his birth mother, but
Right.
she's dead because she had died of breast cancer.
Right.
Yeah.
Although you can claim anything online.
Well, you can claim anything online, but this is who you're methadone. This is who you're methadoning out of Twitter.
Well, every
You didn't
once in a
even check
while,
my profile?
no, yours doesn't have a lot of drama. Yours is all content. I'm not going to check in on X for wholesome things. I'm checking in for the things that are like enrage me and
And trigger the brain chemical. All right. So you're sort of clean and you have not met your 30-day mark for your turn back on. So we're
no, I don't even know if I'll get a coin now because I was using this other website.
Yeah, this doesn't sound clean to me. It just sounds
Will one of you be my sponsor?
a little
Like
crappy.
every time I go on to Knitter to go check on some drama, can I call you afterwards and be like, I couldn't avoid it anymore. My fingers, I wasn't even paying attention to my fingers. I was just trying to go to what's a wholesome website? I was trying to go to
New
Pinterest.
York Times.
No.
What
No,
is
no,
the
no.
service? What is the point of this website seems like it's just for crazy people that want to say that they're not on X. So you go to a different website. You go to a different website so that you can look at the stuff on X without being on X.
I can't reply to it.
Okie dokie.
All I can do is cope and seethe,
That again sounds very healthy. Good.
and then tell my friends.
And then talk to your friends about what you
Yeah,
saw on the website that shows
yeah,
you X on
yeah.
your public platform.
You
So you do kind of
somebody
get to
asked.
respond. I feel like you're really doing a shit job at getting yourself clean here.
Well, I'm going to pivot
Jamie, will you
slightly.
be my sponsor? Because Lauren's terrible. Yeah, let's pivot. Let's pivot. I don't
Let's
need
pivot. So,
this is I didn't realize this was going to be some type of Spanish Inquisition.
many people commented last week that they were, I guess, flabbergasted that I knew nothing about Tumblr. I
Mhm.
should make it very clear right now that I was on zero, none, not a social media ever until about what, 4 to 5 months after the Free Press story came out. I joined X.
Hmm.
Then I joined Facebook like a year after that, but I didn't know social media because I wasn't on any, because I was a Luddite.
Right. She was making zines and shoving them in newspaper boxes.
No, that was a
Oh,
hypo
that was her.
no, that was a hypothetical.
Right. Oh,
Oh,
right. I'm sorry. My bad.
That was not that was a hypothetical. Okay.
okay.
So let's get into the actual real heroine for the week, the content of the week. Um, so a tiny bit of background. We're going back to good old Alabama. Alabama proves yet again to be the driving force in bringing down the WPATH. So Alabama had a court case that led to a whole bunch of discovery, which led to a whole bunch of emails first, that has now led to a whole bunch of video. So, friend of the pod, Ben Ryan, journalist, this week published a large piece in a magazine called Compact, which I had not ever heard of before. Was anybody familiar with this before?
Yeah, I'm familiar
Mm-mm.
with contact. I want to add because if he were here, he would say, "I'm neutral. I'm not a friend of the podcast. I've just been a guest on it." Because he wants to be very, very clear he's neutral. I just trying to
Who's that?
represent for him.
Ben
Ben
Ryan.
Ryan.
Oh, Ben Ryan. Yeah.
He is
Yeah.
not our friend.
He's not
No.
our friend. To hell
He
with
is
that guy.
Hell with Ben. Yeah.
Yeah.
okay. So, well, what makes somebody a friend of a podcast?
Anyway,
I think we're getting into the weeds here. Can
what
we?
did he write about? I
Fine.
wanted to
Okay.
put that disclaimer.
Okay. So he published a very large piece in Compact magazine this week that talked in depth about these videos that he had obtained through the state of Alabama as a journalist. The state had forced WPATH to provide, I think, 130 videos from their conferences, which journalists could then request, which he did, from the discovery material. And he has systematically, I believe, watched all of them. And he wrote a rather large piece about it. And now he has been slow dumping on his Substack these pieces, these videos. And he put out a 30-minute video that had a bunch of clips, kind of like the highlight reel of the baddies from WPATH. And then, are they not the baddies?
Our opponents. Our opponents.
Okay, our opponents from WPATH. And thus far, he put out the 30 minutes. He put out a Kellan Baker video. And then this morning, he dropped a Chase Strangio, which I believe I've been pronouncing that wrong, video. I think we should talk about Chase next week because I'm halfway through watching it and it was a little bit, it was upsetting to watch.
Okay.
But can we talk about the Kellan Baker video to start with?
Sure.
Okay. So what I thought we could do is we could play story time for Lauren. So I will give Lauren Kellan's background. Cori, you could do kind of an oversight of the video itself, and then we can let Lauren kind of ask some questions and be our audience. Does that work for you, Lauren?
Perfect.
Okay. So let me tell you first about Kellan Baker. So Kellan Baker has a Bachelor's of Arts with high honors from Swarthmore College, where she double majored in astrophysics and Russian literature. Um, we should make an editorial note here. Kellan is a trans-identified female. So Kellan presents as a male, but is a female. And I did reach out to Kellan and where Kellan is employed now to ask Kellan to come on and speak with us. I, not surprisingly, did not get a response.
We
But
could.
I don't know. I said to Lauren, maybe I should tweet after about the person and give it a day to let the request to come on come out. But okay, so she holds BA in astrophysics and Russian literature. She went on to earn a Master's of Public Health and a Master's of Arts from George Washington University, and then a PhD in Health Policy and Management from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where she was both a Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Research Scholar and a Centennial Scholar. Personally speaking, for her own like gender background, she came out as a lesbian in high school. She transitioned in her mid 20s, very similar to Chase here. She transitioned medically while living in Russia, which is her Russian literature undergrad degree. She obtained hormone therapy by volunteering as a research subject at the Russian National Institute of Endocrinology.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah,
Helping their Olympics program, probably.
yes. So she advocates for early medical intervention in children, um, children who potentially clinically looked like she did. Um, so her dissertation focused on the costs and benefits of insurance coverage for gender affirming care. Her career has moved through some of the institutions and think tanks that have shaped the gender medicine debate in the United States. She worked as a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. While she was there, she co-founded a program called Out to Enroll, which advocated for transgender inclusion in ACA health insurance, so in Obamacare enrollment. So she was trying to help get trans-identified people enrolled in Obamacare. She then served as executive director of the Whitman Walker Institute in Washington, D.C., another think tank. You know this place?
Oh, I used to be a patient at the clinic.
Oh, wow.
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm, mhm.
And then she moved into her current role, which is the Senior Advisor for Health Policy at the Movement Advancement Project. When I was telling Lauren about this, I said she works at MAP, and Lauren was like, wait, what? Thinking that,
Why?
I thought it meant minor attracted persons, and I was like,
Oh,
wait. Apparently that's not what it means. Not too far off. But
I, based on what I saw in the video, it could also stand for masculine appearing person.
all right, give me one more minute and then you can get into the video. So, probably one of the biggest issues um, with Kellan is that there was a series of systematic reviews that were commissioned by WPATH for Johns Hopkins University to conduct. So they were paid and they were pulled in to conduct these independent systematic reviews. Those reviews were supposed to be the evidence to underpin the standard of care 8, SOC 8. Baker was the lead author, Kellan Baker. Baker was the lead author on the only one review that was ultimately published, the 2021 meta-analysis examining the effects of hormone therapy on mental health and quality of life. The review's own findings showed that there was low and insufficient evidence, but Baker concluded that hormone therapy is, quote, likely associated with improvements in quality of life, depression, and anxiety, and represents, quote, an essential component of care. This was directly contradicting the actual systematic evidence that was found by the review. Then, after that review came out, WPATH started to assert direct editorial influence over the following systematic reviews, including creating a checklist to confirm that a WPATH representative was involved in the design, drafting of the article, and final approval. They end up essentially killing all of the other systematic reviews. They were supposed to be, I think that Hopkins completed 6. One was published. It was Kellan's, and the rest were killed and or suppressed. That's kind of Baker's part, claim to fame. So, Lauren, any questions about her? Do you have like a good sense of who this is before we get into the video that was released?
Yes. Yes, please. Let's get into the video.
Okay. Cori, that's
Cori,
you.
that's your part.
That's my part.
You watched the video.
I did watch the video. So Benjamin Ryan published this on his Substack, Hazard Ratio. And the title is, "We All Support Trans Kids in the..." Well, I have the transcript up, so it's covering up the title. We'll link it in the show notes. But so this, Kellan Baker was at the time the executive director of the Whitman Walker Institute in DC, doing policy wonk stuff, and presented in front of WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Okay, the Whitman Walker Institute, their clinic provides that. So maybe this is what the connection is, but this talk was largely setting the political landscape of what was happening in 2023. I would say 2023 is the year that we really started to have a sizable impact in the legislatures. Maybe 2022 before that was starting to really ramp up, but 2023 is where a lot of the impact happened. And Kellan Baker gives this sort of glib overview of the political landscape. What's really interesting to me is that throughout the whole presentation, Baker is really trying to behave as some type of coordinator, as some type of nexus to help the people in the room plan around counterattacks or defenses for their for the political landscape. There is that
so not at all concerned with the evidence. And does this person engage at all with the fact that the reason these laws and stuff are being passed is because the overabundance of evidence that this is not medically necessary?
Well, from her viewpoint, she thinks that it is medically necessary.
Should we share a couple quotes with
makes
Lauren?
a number of... Sure.
No, go ahead. You were about to do it. She makes a couple of...
We're in the worst timeline. I'm looking for some of the choice quotes here. I'm sorry for the delay. Okay, so
I'm gonna...
Yeah, I've got one here. So first of all, this is kind of early and not about in the middle of the talk, about 26 minutes. She's talking about the NIH cooperation with the gender industry. And as you remember, there was a president, it wasn't Trump at the time, it was Kamala Harris under the Harris administration. And I'm sorry, the Biden administration. And she says the administration has also recently invested in they've signaled that they have interest in research that supports the provision of best practice medically necessary care for trans people of all ages. So in this WPATH presentation, she's talking about all of the connections that she has in the federal government and with lawmakers, institutionalizing. She tries to emphasize this point to keep echoing this idea that these procedures are medically necessary. So she never really explains it, but she says that to defend yourself against any of the reports or accusations that what you're doing is not grounded in medicine, she says, to counterattack by describing these as extreme political attacks that ban medically necessary care. And the framing that she encourages the audience to use is that these are attacks on the medical care of children, and that it's overriding the parents' ability to make the best choices for their kids. So she's basically there to help develop a playbook about protecting medically necessary, essential medical care, prescribed medical care. And these are all descriptions that she uses and encourages people to use to defend these practices. She says, language is really important for holding their hands and helping them understand what this care actually is. So this is her whole point, is the framing of how this is supposed to work. And did we see any of this in 2024 or 2025? Did we see any of this happen and enter again? Yeah, any of the language changes?
That's a good.
I think it depends on what level. I think it depends on what level of the debate you're at. Like, I do still think that the life-saving care narrative, suicide prevention narrative is still very much in the public sphere. Maybe professionals arguing about the evidence have shifted gears, but I think that in the general populace, like I see this stuff all the time. It's life-saving care, protect trans kids. Like the argument has not shifted to explain away that there's absolutely no evidence to do this.
But she's also, her recommendation in 23 is to, instead of say gender affirming care, say medically necessary care or prescribed or prescribed care. I think that they wanted to claw back the phrase gender affirming care. It's interesting because both sides has argued about this phrase. In listening to Kellan's saying we need to stop saying gender affirming care because when it was like tested, when they like tested it in, I guess like they asked normies, what do you think of when you hear gender affirming care? I guess the normies were hearing trans kids in the driver's seat and that they were also equating transition to surgeries. But then our side kind of also is trying to stop using the phrase gender affirming care because of the affirmation, the positiveness to it. I just think it's interesting that both sides, for different reasons, was trying to shift that language.
Since you say that, one of the things that's interesting that Kellan Baker said is she talks about that frame with the kids in the driver's seat, and then she gives this knowing wink. I'll read from the transcript here. So messaging research is increasingly showing that this term, gender affirming care, is unfamiliar to broad audiences. And when they hear it, they think trans kids in the driver's seat. Many of us here, I think we all support trans kids in the driver's seat because it's their bodies, it's their lives, right? So she's winking. She's saying, yeah, that's what they're hearing. And also, that's what we mean. But we should change our messaging because even though our intent is being clearly communicated, we don't want that intent to be clearly communicated. We should be less obvious about what we're saying, is basically her argument here.
So her argument is to obfuscate the facts, use gentler language, and never talk directly about the interventions themselves, the harm they cause, and the
That's right.
and the people coming forward to say that this did not work for me. Okay.
Let me read these bullets. And by the way, I would like to just stop and say all of this is possible for us to even talk about because of Benjamin Ryan's publishing of it. So please, when you're done with this, at least go check out his work. But I want to read the slide that was presented that Dr. Baker presented, titled "Combating Disinformation." I'm going to read the bullets. We can. Do you want to talk about them after I read each bullet? Let's see how it goes. We'll do the first one. So it's the first bullet. Illustrate concrete harms for both youth and parents. Not the harms of the interventions, obviously, the harms of...
Say it again.
Illustrate concrete harms for both youth and parents.
Okay.
So this is combating disinformation, right? So when people like us show up and say people have regret 5 to 7 years after they have these procedures, and it's too late at that point to do anything about it, they want to instead focus on the harms by not doing it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, next bullet. Emphasize the role of parents in the process. Now, simultaneous, this is 2023 when this talk was given. At the very same time, emphasize the role of parents in the process. We have states like Colorado and California, and what's happening in those states?
We've weaponized child protective services against parents who just want to be part of the process.
Right. So this is, I would say, talking out of two sides of your mouth. Third, emphasize the benefits of medical care for transgender youth and the harms of denying it.
Okay, so there's a theme here. Are there more bullets?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I want to get to the last one. You want me to just run through these?
Yeah, keep going.
Illustrate threats to medical providers, reinforce medical necessity in describing medical care. And she's true to this point because she says medically necessary over and over in her talk. And then the final one, which I think is worth a whole discussion, is don't follow anti-transgender pundits down their rabbit holes.
Whoa, okay.
What does that mean? Can you rephrase that?
Don't follow. Oh, my pen. Okay.
Don't engage with people talking about the evidence.
Do not listen to critics.
Yeah.
Do not try to understand the viewpoint of the critics. That's what this is saying. Don't follow anti-transgender pundits down their rabbit holes.
Okay.
Do not engage with the other side's viewpoints. That is what is being said here.
Okay. That bullet doesn't surprise me, but we can talk about that one for a minute. Two of the bullets ahead of that, I think I did hear that reflected back to me from one of the gender doctors that I worked with, which was it was a way to push back by saying, well, sure, we might be harming some of the kids, but we would harm different kids if we didn't give them this.
Right.
He would try to argue that with me.
Right.
Yeah. So, who do you think Kellen thinks are the anti-transgender pundits, and what are our rabbit holes?
I don't think there's
Truth
any
and medical
doubt.
evidence. Don't go down the rabbit hole of truth and medical evidence, folks.
What?
What's
Well,
fascinating is that both sides of this argument almost make the same exact argument.
what's that?
They make the same arguments, like both sides are saying parents have rights to help their kids through medical situations. Both sides are saying we need to help kids. Both sides are trying not to use the phrase gender affirming care. It's like mirror images of arguments depending on which side you're on. The problem here is that only one side of this debate is looking at reality, medical evidence, long-term
Uh,
outcomes.
I would say to build on that point, Lauren,
Thank you.
where Kellan Baker says, don't engage with the critics and follow them down their rabbit holes. We say the opposite. We say, you should actually go listen to these people and examine every word that they're saying.
what? That was what I was also
Yes,
gonna
I
say.
mean, but that's one of the few differences, really. A lot of it is being framed in the same way. The only difference that is a big difference to say don't engage at all with the other side or engage as much as possible and understand what they're saying and where they're coming from. But other than that, the other arguments are very similar.
I think a great case in point. I would love it if somebody could point me in the direction of a podcast, for example, that has um, multiple trans rights activists who are willing to listen to an entire SEGM conference presentation, listen to the whole thing, and engage with the content. If
Not,
anybody,
not, to, not to mock it, not to pillory it, but to actually
we do a little
listen.
mocking, but to actually engage with it.
Right, right. To do the intellectual work.
Well, going back to a little bit of the intellectual work, I do think we need to think about this message that Baker is arguing that it's okay for, quote, trans kids to be in the driver's seat.
Yeah. As long as they're not drinking. Maybe a little bit.
Because that has an age restriction.
Right. That's true. So they can be in the driver's seat, but they have to wait to have their first beer till 21, but they can have their breasts removed at 14.
Okay. The bullet points that you pulled out from her talk, was there anything in addition to what she said? I'm interested. Uh-oh, what?
I just before I'm going to have a hard cutoff here in about 20 minutes, but I really wanted to tell you my favorite part
Oh, go ahead.
before
Yes.
again I need to.
Yeah, tell me your favorite part.
Oh dear. It's just these websites take over your hotkeys, so you can't do find anymore. They try to make everything full size. All right, I want to read this here. All right. Has anyone here received a visit from Admiral Levine? Yeah, I see some hands. Yeah, so Admiral Levine is a very high-ranking official at the US Department of Health and Human Services. She is a pediatrician. She is a trans woman, and she is very interested in using the power of her position to advance understanding of the needs and rights and protections for trans kids and their families. So she has been making visits around the country. There's also a new agenda I love an agenda. I love a good trans agenda. I literally have a whole text thread, the text threads that are titled like the trans agenda. So the building up Stephen Levine, but then saying, yeah, this is the trans agenda. Do you know what? I think she lacks the self-awareness. I think she thinks she's making a joke. I think, I don't think that she realizes that when critics on the right say trans agenda, that that is literally what she is doing, and she's admitting to it.
Yeah.
Unironically.
Unironically, I don't think that she realized, because later she talks about how important it is to make sure that we keep up appearances. In fact, she says gender expansive people shouldn't be showing up to give testimony at legislatures because they freak out the normies.
Wait, really?
Yeah,
He
she
wants
says
people that are more
gender
Passing.
conforming.
He wants gender conforming and gender passing people.
Right. Because people who are, well, like half the people that we see show up to these things, she doesn't think that they're helpful.
Oh, so
I would say they're very helpful. They should keep showing up, please, by all
They
means.
should also keep bringing their 4 untrained service dogs that have like punk rock patches on that bark at people and growl and clearly, yeah.
And their 7-year-olds who are also gender expansive. They should bring them also.
Oh yeah. I mean,
yeah. So ignore Kellan Baker. He's not trying to help you. You should definitely come to these legislature meetings, folks.
yes. We need more of the leather dykes that show up. Do you remember the leather dyke, Lauren?
The baby
Joan from Biddeford.
Oh, Joan from Bedford showed up. Joan was like a dirty punk man that you would not want to find in an alley after the show at midnight, and yet Joan was like, "I am Joan, and I am a leather dyke." It's like, oh my God,
Is this a man or a woman?
this is a man.
Joan was a man, probably 6'2". Looked like he just got out of prison, shaved head, covered in leather, probably rides a motorcycle, calling himself Joan. Yeah, that's where
At testimony. So Kellan's nobody followed.
But technically Joan is not gender nonconforming. Joan is a man.
Well,
and I don't know. So where does she draw the line with that one? I mean, is he gender nonconforming? Is he not gender nonconforming? Like, it's all messed up. Whatever. Anyway,
it's
go
unclear.
on.
It's unclear.
This is very unclear.
I was interrupting Jamie's point.
What was my point?
No.
Well, I interrupted it to say that they don't want the gender expansive people showing up to the
They want the binary passing people showing up. And also, I think that they want the trans-identified females showing up and not the trans-identified men.
That's probably true.
Yeah. Okay. So now can I ask you a couple questions about the presentation before you have to go?
Yeah, by all means. Let's do it.
Okay. So Kellan, it sounds like, was trying to use a bit of humor, maybe making some jokes. That was the audience going along with it? Were they laughing?
The audience was engaged.
Uh-oh.
Okay, you can't be on camera.
Drama Llama has not kept the attention. The audience was engaged. Were they laughing along? And
that's my impression. It could have been a laugh track. We use those at the Sega meetings.
Seriously, can somebody find a podcast that does what we do on the other side? I'm so interested now. Okay. My other question, did Kellan kind of address it all? Why is Kellan talking about basically activism at what's supposed to be a scientific conference?
It's not supposed to be a scientific conference, so let me correct you right there.
It's a WPATH. It's supposed to be the World Professional Association of Transgender Healthcare. It's supposed to be a healthcare conference.
Didn't you just say scientific conference?
Oh my God. Sure. Okay. Yes.
It's not. This is an industry group. This is the gender industry. This is their gender industry conference. It's
Okay.
not a scientific conference and it's not even a medical conference. It's an industry conference.
Okay, one other question. Does Kellan at all address, I don't know how to phrase this. Do any of these presenters who are trans identified themselves talk at all about the fact that they have a conflict of interest?
Well, I think that would be a question that could only be answered by looking at all of these different videos. But no, I don't think.
At the beginning of this talk, so if you present at a medical conference, at the beginning of your talk, you are supposed to acknowledge and address and state your conflicts of interest. So that would be, hi, I'm Jamie Reed. My grant funding has been paid by X,
Yeah.
or this.
Elon Musk.
No, I have
Okay.
no, no. I mean, like, did Kellen say at the beginning, these are my conflicts of interest? I'm
Not
employed by a think tank. My paycheck is to
No,
advance these
no. She was
causes.
introduced. She had the full introduction, and then she thanked the presenter for the introduction and went right in.
And she
This
didn't
is
say, as a trans-identified person myself who's been utilizing these drugs, I have a conflict of interest.
No, but I presented at GenSpect. I didn't say that.
Okay.
Well, but that again, like you have to do that at a medical conference, but this isn't. They're not a medical. It's an activist organization.
Yeah, it's an industry conference.
Okay. Well, I just I, then okay. Well,
You're you are so principled, Jamie,
I,
that sometimes you get confused about other people who you would say these are the baseline assumptions for anybody who prescribes medicine or performs procedures on another human being. These are the baseline ethics of anybody, even if I disagree with their beliefs or their other values. This is the baseline. That's what you believe. But they're
it's not a belief. I was trained as a clinical researcher, and I always had to address and look at my conflicts of interest, be those
yeah.
fiscal or personal or
And
yeah.
would you say that by and large that the person who held you to those standards was yourself or someone else?
I think the training in the other medical fields drills in that your conflicts of interest are relevant, that the audience always needs to have that information, but also that the audience expects it. And so I think it's a culture set by WPATH that they did not set the culture to have that as part of the expectation.
Well, it's been progressively infiltrated by activists.
Was it ever not?
Well, let's think of it as a percentage wise. At one point, it would have been by and large almost entirely people who were considered medical providers. I don't think that that's true anymore.
When it was the Harry Benjamin Society,
That's right.
back when it was at the Benjamins.
When it was all about the Benjamins.
Yeah. Okay, so next week, I would like to talk about the Chase presentation and then also any other relevant news that comes up in the world. And also, we'll check in on your methadone usage.
We
But
didn't even talk about the Supreme Court thing this week.
oh God, I'm not ready to talk about it yet.
All right.
Ugh. It was 8-1.
I know that all of the attorneys voted on one side. Every person on the Supreme Court who can say for sure that they know what a woman is, were on the same side of that ruling.
And Kenji Brown, who has no idea, was the only one.
Brown Jackson, yes.
Yes.
Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Did you have any thoughts on the Supreme Court ruling?
I haven't read it all the way through. I've only read the first half of it. I haven't
Yeah,
gotten to the dissent yet.
I would need to read it because my initial thoughts on this case, we're talking about the Chili's case, which if any of our listeners are not familiar, it was a case brought against the state of Colorado, right? And it was a therapist challenging their affirmation law, correct? That you
No, their conversion therapy.
conversion therapy ban,
Mhm.
which included gender identity. So it essentially stopped these therapists in Colorado from examining the roots of a transgender ideation in even children. They argued that that was a violation of free speech. My initial thoughts on this was that this was bad either way, because if therapy is just free speech, anybody can say anything no matter how detrimental to a client. So I don't know that this is a huge win against gender woo. I do think, however, it may lead to some problems for proto-gay youth or gay and lesbians who are working through understanding their sexual attraction. But again, I have not read the decision, and I was surprised that it was 8-1. I expected the normal 6-3 split. So because of that 8-1 ruling, I'm much more curious as to their reasoning and how specific their ruling is, and what exactly about this law in Colorado they all, I mean, a large majority of them agreed on. So I want to read the transcripts, etc., and maybe talk to somebody with a little more legal training than myself before I really make any sweeping comments about what it means. But I think it's interesting because again, I was not expecting 8-1 is a pretty solid, like you expect that if it's 8-1 that it's grounded very solidly in legal tradition. So I'm interested in reading it.
I I think my biggest thought about it so far this week is that I miss one of my friends.
Yeah.
Who's your friend?
I miss Glenna.
You miss Glenna? What happened? Don't tell me she was up in the shuttle and it went around the moon.
No,
Yeah, yeah. She's
Glenna
on
got
she's on Artemis too right now.
Wow. That's why she can't appear and talk to us about the Supreme Court cases,
she
because
can't.
she's got the
No,
NASA pre-commitments.
she got a real job.
She did. Glenna got a real job and now can't talk to us.
Glenna got a real job and like legit can't talk to us anymore or like be our friend.
Can we have Henna Holdus come on? Just, you know, like obscure his or her face and use a voice changer. I want to talk about the Supreme Court with you.
No, Glenna is like
Can't
not
do
only
that.
did she get a real job, but she's being like a real legit professional at it. And it was like, that's what I just said. I miss my friend.
Well,
Maybe we should find another attorney that we can get like Glenna.
I'm sure
Yes,
we could
please,
find somebody
listeners.
who would fill in for her.
Listeners, send us your recommendations on
You know,
legal scholars or
you know,
lawyers
we could
that
just
argue.
we could
Let's,
just talk to Kara Dansky.
there's a woman who has even argued in front of the Supreme Court that we could bring on to talk to about some of these issues.
Who's that?
Her
Chase
name's Chase Strangio.
Chase is
Hmm.
never no.
I don't know that we're gonna get that one.
She will
Well,
never talk to me again after deposing me for a whole day and me yelling at her about my cat. So,
that is the most lesbian story I've ever heard.
and I didn't even tell it. Okay, Corey, you have to go. We
I
have
do.
to go. Um, but yeah.
All right.
Let's wave up to the moon where Glenna is floating around us. We miss you, Glenna.
Come back safely.
All right, let's roll on to our guests.
Welcome back to Informed Dissent for this Saturday, April the 4th. I'm Jamie Reed, whistleblower from a pediatric gender center, here today with one of my esteemed co-hosts and our guest. I will have Lauren introduce herself, and then we'll move on to having Kevin introduce himself. So, Lauren.
I'm Lauren, the best co-host.
We're missing
There you go.
Cori right now.
So he can't
And
respond.
no, he can't. And Kevin Kellar is our guest today. Kevin, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Again, my name is Kevin Kellar. I'm a 30-year litigation lawyer who specializes in dropping into tort trials nationally for catastrophic losses. That's typically multiple deaths, collapses of buildings, bad burn injuries, traumatic brain injuries, quadriplegics, stuff like that. So it's kind of high exposure loss trials and valuations. And that's kind of my specialty. And what I help with on the gender care litigation, and again, along with y'all, and I've listened to some of your podcasts and read some of your stuff. I hate calling it gender affirming care, but I'll do it for ease here. We know it's medicalized, whatever, and you can string a bunch of adjectives onto it. But I act as a consultant on a lot of the cases that are litigated nationally, kind of behind the scenes. I help advise and consult on legal theories, best avenues to pursue, experts, arguments for damages and liability. And so far, I've done that in a pro bono fashion, but generally help all the firms. I work with most of the firms, at least to some degree, who have this litigation nationally.
What got you interested in this type of litigation, in gender affirming, in this model?
That's a great question, because over time you got to re-evangelize yourself as to your initial cause, right? And what offended me initially in this, going back 3 or 4 years, and I know y'all have been in the battle for much longer. Thank you, and Lauren especially, but going back longer. But it really just offended me at such a basic level. I could not imagine a more evil practice than some of the stuff I was reading about occurring to our youths. I'm not one of the parents who have been directly affected by this yet, and I know there are many, and we meet with them and talk with them at like the FTC hearing and Transgender Day and the Gen Spec stuff. But I have not been directly affected by gender affirming care. I haven't lost a son or daughter to it, but I will say that the ideology overall, my mouth was just open and agape when I heard stories about it, and started reading, the books like Abigail Schreier's and many others that were out there at the time. Deborah So's, I was reading some, and others, and it's like I just, and following some of the following some of the social media, and I heard just so many examples of stuff I thought were just blatantly, I hate to use the word evil, but just really wrong, and it offended me. So I thought, well, I'm a lawyer. What can I do? I mean, is there something I can do, to address this? It seems like low hanging fruit from a philosophy that is very flawed, and something that I truly believe is ahistorical, meaning I do not believe there is a parallel in human history to what has occurred here. I know you hear attempts to explain it, and if you start this conversation with a lot of people, they'll go, oh, well, you had eunuchs back in, Greece and Rome, and you had lobotomies in the 50s, 40s, 30s. And it's like, yeah, but none of them asked you to deny basic reality. Nobody was telling a lobotomized woman, and I'm sure you guys know, it's mainly women who were lobotomized for their hysteria. which is where the term hysterectomy was even derived from, or hysteria derived from hysterectomy. But it's always been girls, it seems like, that have been most affected by this, by these odd, offensive medical procedures in history, including ovurectomies, hysterectomies, overprescription of hysterectomies, mother's little helper, etc. So I think there are some parallels with some other historical things, but nothing that challenged the basic nature of reality of you're born a man or a woman, and that somehow, if you're gay, you're not allowed to behave in whatever way you want, as opposed to being told that you were born in the wrong, body. It's shocking to me. I still can't, even when I sit here and try to explain it, I think we're at a loss for words to try to sufficiently encapsulate it and capture it. So it bothered me enough. I knew I was a lawyer at a certain stage in my career where I thought, well, I have a lot of experience with some areas of tort law, such that I think I could reach out to some people I know and maybe try to help get the ball rolling or help behind the scenes.
So, Kevin, I have to ask you a question. So, I am not an attorney, lawyer in any way. I've had one class in my Master's of Science on Law. What does the word tort mean?
At its most basic level, and I'm going back to my college classes because I don't know that I was much told in law school, tort is a private wrong.
Okay.
And crime, as opposed to a crime, which is a public wrong. Now, I think we can agree this is probably a crime too, if we had our way. But a tort is a private wrong for which there is private redress. So a tort is something that happens. It began really in kind of the trespass. in English common law, it was like a trespass to the person. Like every tort was a battery. If you had a slip and fall and were hurt, meaning you tripped and fell down some stairs, or somebody assaulted and punched you, or somebody robbed from you, and these were torts that could be sued on. They were viewed kind of as a trespass to your person, your personhood, and your personal integrity, and so you could sue and get recovery for it. The way it's defined by the law is all torts have the same prima facie case, the same four elements, and that is duty, breach, causation, damages. It's always four. So first of all, if you're suing somebody, they had to owe you a duty to behave in a certain way. And a lot of times there is no duty. In other words, sadly, a parent typically, we're working on that, can't sue a doctor for transitioning, and I know y'all hate that word, transitioning your kid when they become of majority, and there's a lot of those cases out there, because there's no duty owed to the parent. The duty is owed, to the patient. Okay. So there's no duty there that's owed. Now, the law can make a duty there. You can pass a statute and create a duty, but at common law, there's no duty to the parent for a basic tort. Then there's a breach of the duty. That's easy. They violated the standard of care in some way. And then there's causation, and causation can be a tough one in a lot of cases. Was the breach a cause of an injury? And then you get to injury, and it's what actually is the injury or the harm or the damages. All of these things, I think, in gender care cases can become very pedantic, almost philosophical, because I do not believe that courts, judges, have a fair grasp, a correct grasp and understanding of the harm and the wrongdoing that's done in these cases. Thus, we lose a lot of lawsuits, right? Because they say, well, the harm and the wrongdoing, they knew, the potential plaintiff or the claimant knew, the patient knew, just after the surgery, she had such and such complication just after the surgery. So the statute of limitations begins to run then. Whereas I would say they have no idea what the harm and wrongdoing was, because they had no idea that the entire world was lying to them. They had no studies. There was no basis for informing them of what the risks, right, were, or the benefits of this surgery based on what a 30-person Dutch protocol thing done, whatever year it was, 2011 or 12, or whatever. So I think that can be very tough for courts to grapple with and say, look, they didn't even know, these people did not even know that they were being defrauded until maybe the Cass report, not officially. I know those of us behind the scenes were like, there's no studies to support this. There's never been any long-term studies. But it was, the medical industry and the zeitgeist didn't change until maybe 2023. And, it's still going on now. So that's the injury or harm. I know I went down a rabbit hole there, but it's hard not to. That's the injury or the harm. And causation, for example, can be tough because we have suicide cases as well, right? Not all of the cases that we've helped on are detransitioner cases. There are a large number of suicide cases where, a troubled, confused person goes on hormones and within 6 months or 4 months, and I know y'all know some of these people, their kid commits suicide in college, found hanging in the closet or overdosed on this or that over-the-counter medical. And then the danger, the problem there is, can I prove that the gender care, the actual administration of cross-sex hormones, is what caused this person to commit suicide? Not that it's part of the blame and it's offensive and it bothers the heck out of us. I wish that was the standard. It's, can I prove that it was? Different states have different rules, but one of the main causes, as opposed to this person already had, of course, most do, right? Just a very complex history of depression, suicidal ideation and such before they committed suicide. So it can be a very intense, all of these things can be very intense issues that are tough to figure out.
Lauren, you had a question.
Yeah, so particularly in the case of gender affirming care, when we're talking about harms, what we're seeing as harms are the intended outcome, right? So like we see the removal of breast, for example, as the harm itself, but it is the actual intended outcome of the surgery if you're getting quote unquote top surgery. So did you see what I'm getting at here? So
yes,
depending on your outlook, those same things are both harm and the correct result for the treatment. So
for the treatment, right? The harm is the treatment.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, is that another confounding factor? Because again, Jamie says all the time, like the law is logical, but this is complete, in my view, it's just completely illogical, but has been it's been inserted into our law in so many different forms. So I could see it going either way when you're arguing that these are harms, that these doctors could very well say, but this is exactly what you asked me to do.
Right. No, I agree. And I think we're saying the same thing. It's really hard. That's why I began with saying it gets down to dialectics. I don't know who it was. I'll say Socrates. There's probably some other Greek I don't know. So before you discuss, with me, or before we have a debate, let's define our terms. And it's really hard to define terms of, what the harm is and how deceptive it is that the harm is called treatment. And I really do believe it is very hard to find parallels to this. And that's why these cases are very hard and judges struggle with it, because they're dealing with the typical medical malpractice case and context. This is something entirely new, right? So I'll give you an odd example. Maybe it's a little too abstract, but when in English common law in Old England, when they began to have stagecoaches transporting goods, the person, the courier, transporting the goods, the stagecoach or whatever it was back then, would sometimes just take off with it and steal it. That was, and so English common law had no way to address that. That was not a crime or a tort at that time. Because a theft is taking something that's not in your possession, that you don't legally have the right to possess, and stealing it. And these people would say, I had the right to possess it. It was given to me by the owner. And then we took off with it, or we were robbed of it. along the trails by a bandit or something. So we're not responsible for it. And so English law had to change. They created the concept of bailments that, you give somebody something, just like you take your ring to the pawn shop, they owe you a duty not to have it stolen or to steal it because it's a bailment. They have it in their possession. They owe you a duty. I think they're going to have to change the law. And I know we're going to loop back to this later. The legislatures and the courts themselves, I believe, can internally say, look, the law is not an ass, as they say. The law is not an ass. There should be a way to address.
The law is not an ask?
Yes, ass. Two S's.
Oh, the law is not an ass.
Not a jackass. Let me say it that way. Yes.
Okay.
It's an actual legal quote, by the way.
Okay.
It's a quote that's used in some briefs. The law is not an ass. There has to be a way to address what is an obvious harm, right? But how are you going to define harm and injury and wrongdoing? Because historically, the wrongdoing is you had a surgery, and guess what? Your stitches start to swell up and infect, right? And so, right at that point in time, you knew you had suffered a breach of duty towards you as the patient, and that the clock begins to run on the statute of limitations. But in the gender affirming care context, most of the time, this is just a huge gray area at best. And I don't even think it's gray. I think these people, even 10 years later, are being told, had surgeries at 15 or something in 2014 or 15, are being 2013 in the case of Amanda Stewart, right, up in New Hampshire, that, hey, you should have known this for 10 years. And I consider it worse. I consider she's been deceived for 10 years. There's been 10 years of people telling her through everything else she's been through that's awful in her life, that this is treatment, Lauren, as you were putting it. This is your treatment. This is an expected, intended result. This has made you better. So, courts struggle with that. They look for something as a brighter line that they can pick out. And I think if they correctly applied the law and the intent of the law, that they would be more lenient on when they run what accrues and triggers the statute of limitations. It's the way we say, which is the period that runs before you're barred from bringing a tort action.
Okay. So medical malpractice, med mal, is a type of tort.
Yes.
Okay.
But it's based on the same it has the same four prima facie elements.
Okay. Is informed consent or consent part of the duty? Is that built into that section where?
Well, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is it depends on what jurisdiction you're in. In some states, informed consent, lack of informed consent, is a separate tort that you can plead, a separate count.
Oh, so the medical harm is one tort, and then the lack of informed consent can be its own harm, its own
Can be its own separate count for which you can receive damages. In other words, the doctor can have done everything correctly and performed the surgery correctly, and you received an outcome which is within the risk profile, the bell curve of expected results for the surgery. But if you didn't receive sufficient information, as I know you all have pounded on, if you didn't receive sufficient disclosure to make a reasonable decision, informed decision, then you can still sue the doctor, even though he did everything else right. Some jurisdictions, informed consent is kind of rolled into the tort itself, and you plead it as part of the tort. Informed consent was actually a concept, again, going back to English law. And the initial medical malpractice actions were viewed as batteries, which a battery is of touching without permission. Let's just call it that. Somebody touches you without permission, that's a battery. And so obviously they were saying, well, this is a battery. This is a trespass on your person. This is a battery. If the doctor doesn't give you sufficient informed consent, he's touching you under false premises. He's cutting on you under false, even if he does a great job, even if he cuts off a leg and it saves your life, it's still a tort and a battery because it's an invasion of your personhood, which back then they considered sacred. Of course, your personhood and your personal choices were sacred That's what tort law was supposed to protect. I'm not claiming to be an historian on that, by the way, but that's the genesis of medical malpractice and tort law.
In the current model of gender affirming care, when the phrase the informed consent model is kind of thrown out, do you see any legal conflicts between?
Sure.
Okay, what?
I see a logical conflict. I mean, this is I don't want to say left and right, but the left seems to do words better than the right overall, and phrasing. And what all they've done is taken the informed consent, which is supposed to be something that protects a vulnerable person, and they've turned it on its head to say, oh, this is an informed consent model, meaning there is no standard of care. We just follow whatever the person says they want, and we give them the care they want, right? And there's no breach of a duty. It's nonsensical. It doesn't have meaning within the words that they're using. It's the opposite of informed. It's the opposite of informed consent, of legal informed consent, meaning we don't have to tell you anything, or we tell you some of the risks, and then we wash our hands of it. You decide for yourself. You self-diagnose, and you determine your own care and your own reality and your own truths, and you go forward with it.
In medical malpractice, is diagnosis like a required piece? Do they have?
Could be. Absolutely. It's not in most gender affirming care, and it's certainly, I mean, Olson Kennedy would say it's not. I've seen her online saying it, but in informed consent, it's certainly not, because there's no diagnosis. And I'm sure you've heard many of the gender care doctors saying, I'm less concerned about diagnosing whether there's actually gender dysphoria or this person is actually trans, depending on how they say it, which I think are two vastly different things. But as to treating them, and see, they're skipping over the classic. You go into a doctor classically, and there is observation. There's a medical term for this. They treat you in medical school, and I forgot it, but it's like 4 letters they put together.
It's a SOAP note. It's
there
subjective,
you go.
objective. Yes.
Thank you. So basically, I deposed about 1,000 doctors, and I don't know SOAP by its terms, but it's like observation, diagnosis, prognosis are the main ones, right?
Yes.
So and then their prescription going forward, whatever treatment they prescribe. So so that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to observe and correctly diagnose. Those are supposed to be the sine qua non of any classic medical care. And this gender affirming care is so bad that they want to throw out most of it. They want to throw out that there's observation, diagnosis. They just want to skip to the you self-diagnose. We as a society, we as a subset of the medical world believe that this should help you, and it's better for you if we don't question it, right? So we're going to go ahead and do it.
Okay, Lauren, jump in at any time, but I have maybe a stupid question, but when we're thinking about tort and the harms and who's breaching in gender affirming care, I'm thinking about who are the people that could or should be sued. So I'm thinking of the actual prescriber, the doctor, but then I'm also thinking about the hospital or the clinic, and then I'm also thinking about the professional organization. So when we have medical malpractice lawsuits, who traditionally gets sued in those?
So traditionally, and by statute in most states, it is a medical care provider. So the statutes define who medical care providers are. They could be chiropractors in some states, and then you have counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists, MDs. Those are covered by covered and protected by the medical malpractice statutes. Many of them have damage caps. Many of them have other tort reform requirements that you perform and you prepare an affidavit, sworn statement by a doctor before you sue, or within a certain amount of time that you file your lawsuit, attesting that you're going to come forth with testimony and an opinion that a standard of care was breached, or that the harm was caused by a breach of care. And every state has different rules on it, but yeah, so that's who it applies to. Medical malpractice lawsuit applies to a medical care provider. And again, it doesn't have to be an MD, it can be a counselor, physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist, etc.
So then hospitals don't really have any worry about
No, well, hospitals too. Hospitals would be included, apologies, under the medical malpractice statutes. But hospitals are a dicier issue about whether they're included, what duties they have, because it depends on the role of the hospital. Some hospitals are just kind of renting the space out and charging for it, leasing it out to medical groups. Some are more involved in the actual care and supply the staff and anesthesiologists and that kind of thing. But it has certainly been our position that hospitals also have a duty to know if malpractice is being committed in their surgical spaces, rooms, and that they are proper and appropriate tort defendants in the case. It hasn't always. Sometimes they've been dismissed early. Sometimes they've remained in suit.
Okay.
So typically, it's because the way this works is typically it's a counselor or two who provided surgical clearance letters. SOC 8, SOC 7, you had to have 2 letters, right? So you had a counselor and a psychologist of some kind, or an LCSW doing surgical clearance letters attesting to certain things to the surgeon, and then the surgeon has the green flag to do the surgery. So typically it's the surgeon is the defendant, and then whoever was actually clearing for the surgery. For puberty blockers or testosterone, it's the clinics that are providing, of course, those medications and have not done the proper evaluations before prescribing a very harmful drug with permanent effects. So it's very fact dependent, but typically you're suing clinics who disperse these things or give prescriptions for the cross-sex hormones, or you're suing, if there's surgery, top surgery, bottom surgery, you're suing a couple of counselors who provided counseling and letters and recommendations to the surgeon. You also sue the surgeon. The surgeon usually almost always defends. No, I had 2 letters I'm not a healthcare provider. I'm not a mental health care provider. I'm just a surgeon. But most of the courts so far have held, no, if you're a doctor, you owe a duty for diagnosis, as you began this stream of questions with as well, and that this proper treatment. You can't you have some discretion. You're not a mechanic. I mean, you're operating on a person. You have a duty to make sure they're a proper candidate.
Okay. So then where do these professional or industry organizations do they lie outside? And when I'm saying that, I'm thinking of the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Endocrine Society, the Psychiatric Association, but even wider than that, like I could see a school district or a school like teachers union who pushed this like into a family or on a kid. Do they hold, is there any legal mechanism that they are part of can they be sued in any way?
Right, understand. So I believe they can be sued. It's not under a medical malpractice lawsuit because they would not be defined. These entities you just listed would not be defined healthcare providers. These are just separate industries providing advices on standards of care. They could be sued separately for any wrong or misleading guidance they give that causes harm to people. It's a much harder lawsuit because of duty and causation. Do they owe a duty to does the Endocrine Society owe a duty to, patients, potential patients down the road? Was that duty breached, or did they at the time provide the best advices they had per science? Of course, we would say, no, you were acting as an activist organization. I'm not speaking specifically to Endocrine Society. I'm just saying, if we were suing one of these organizations, we would say you were not following science. You were acting as an advocate, and you were asserting a certain point of view, and you should have known that you would have harmed a bunch of people. Therefore, you owed a duty. And when you put out false information, you breached the duty. And we have experts to come forth and say that was part of the reason these people were harmed. They're harder to sue.
Okay.
What I would think would happen more often, and I hope it begins to happen, is that you sue the doctor, right? And the doctor says, "Wait a minute, I was just following the Endocrine Society," and they can turn around and file their own lawsuit. It's called a third-party action, third-party lawsuit. You're sued, you sue somebody else, and say, "No, it's not me, it's them," and they could turn around and sue.
There are a couple disclaimers on at least the Endocrine Society's website. I think I want to read those disclaimers, and then I want to talk about what the hell is the standard of care and who sets it. But the Endocrine Society's website has disclaimers on it. One of them says the Endocrine Society makes no warranty, expressed or implied, regarding the guidelines, and specifically excludes any warranties of merchantability and fitness for a particular purpose. The Society shall not be liable for direct, indirect, special, incidental, or consequential damages related to the use of the information contained herein. Doesn't that get them, isn't that their free ticket out of?
No. You'll see that same warning on your next Amazon package that you receive, or that might be sitting outside your door right now, for a can opener, an air fryer, whatever. That is a warranty disclaimer. Different states have different rules on whether that disclaimer is effective or whether that disclaimer can even be made. That disclaimer, by the way, that you just read, half of that language is from the Uniform Commercial Code. It's scripted in the UCC, which covers sales of goods. It's not even a medical care type of disclaimer. It's been kind of bastardized and stamped on, in my opinion, on the Endocrine Society's end of their terms. What happened is, what it looks like to me is that the Endocrine Society members got together, or the societies, as they call themselves, members got together. They put forth something which is plainly a standard of care directing doctors how to do stuff. And then they got lawyers involved, and lawyers said, "Hey, we're going to put this disclaimer on there." None of this can be used to say that, to set an actual standard of care, right? And they do that twofold. Now, one reason is perhaps to avoid liability, but the other reason for the Endocrine Society, but it's also to avoid liability for the doctors operating under the standards of care for them. Like WPATH does that, right? WPATH does the same thing, but if you claim that a doctor did not establish the gender confusion for material enough time, right? There's no specific time in SOC 7, but let's say a lot of doctors say 6 months, or a year sometimes. They'll say, well, look, doesn't WPATH say it should be more than a year that they have the confusion or live in this other identity before you do the surgery? And they say, yeah, but look at the end of the WPATH. It says this isn't used to set a standard of care. But you just said that's what you're following as a standard of care. So I don't think they're very effective. I think they're more damning than effective. I think they're stuck on there because the world knows, the medical world knows, and juries will know they intended these to direct the doctors. Why else are they out there? As best practices. They're at least a part of what forms standard of care. I know you're getting ready to ask that question, and that's like the hardest question in the world. It's very abstract. What forms a standard of care? Well, I know we're getting ready to get to that, but it's
like,
okay.
What is it?
It's not anything that any one organization says. I see that's the thing I get. Again, dialectics. I get most involved in conversation. Somebody say, "Well, doesn't WPATH set the standard of care?" Or you'll see a court say, "WPATH sets the standard." No, it doesn't. I know you guys know this, but WPATH is just an organization. It can put out whatever it wants, right? It can put out whatever guidelines it wants. That doesn't mean that the medical world has to adopt them, or should adopt them, or that they're even credible. It doesn't mean that at all. If it could be that a health organization or a state or a bunch of doctors in a state and a major like Kaiser or something say, we, in their own guidelines, say, we have reviewed WPATH standards of care, suggested model standards of care, and we agree that's our standard of care. They can adopt them. But even then, the real standard of care is, what does a reasonable doctor do in that jurisdiction at that time to treat that patient? That's what it's always been. Now, it used to be that there could be a lot of variance in geographical areas, right? So the standard of care might be different in I won't pick on West Virginia, but West Virginia than it is in New York. That, maybe in West Virginia, they'll saw the leg off quicker than they would in New York. I don't know. I don't want to be that crass about it, but there were different standards of care in different geographical location. Pretty much now, everything's a national standard of care, right? If you ask a doctor in West Virginia, what's the proper standard of care for prescribing opiates, then it's going to be the same standard of care that there is in California and Washington and Oregon and New York. So it's what would a reasonable doctor do under the circumstances.
A reasonable doctor would not give a child cross-sex hormones.
I believe that's absolutely accurate. I believe almost any jury would reach that same conclusion. The plaintiffs bringing the cause of action need a well-credentialed doctor to say, yes, that you would not do this. You would not prescribe children cross-sex hormones, period. Now, the battle we have is that most of the experts, even the very good ones that the plaintiffs use, they believe there are some authentic, genuine cases. And I know this has been on your podcast, authentic cases of, I don't know how you want me to use the term.
There's a true trans kid, or that there really is
a true transgender person. Yeah, I'm sorry. I want to be careful with my terms is all.
Okay.
But that they're true transgender people, but they're very, very, very rare, less than 1%, et cetera. And now we've taken it and we've got, 30% of incoming classes at Brown identify as other. So it's all, most of the medical malpractice cases do not try to say there is no such thing as a transgender person. What they do say is, if you're going to do this, you really have to, it's very rare. You have to establish that it's real in this patient. You have to establish that it would help them. And the way you went about it, even if you follow SOC 7 or SOC 8's very liberal, lenient standards, even if you followed them and said that was the standard of care, you didn't follow them. You never correctly established that this person was free of comorbidities, didn't have body dysmorphia, wasn't otherwise depressed, medications, brain fog. You never should have operated on this person, or you never should have prescribed them this. And that's the typical medical malpractice case that we have pending in the U.S. now. I don't know if there's one in which it is alleged that there's no such thing, period, as a true transgender person. I just think I don't know if that's the place for a medical malpractice action.
Okay.
You mean to challenge the entire metaphysical concept?
Yeah, it's certainly harder, right? It's a broadside against the entire industry. And keep in mind that in these medical malpractice cases, the plaintiff's lawyers, the lawyers representing them, whether it's Chuck Lamondre or Josh Payne or whoever, they have a duty, or Adam up in White Plains, they have a duty to their client to try to assert the best legal theory to get a win in that jurisdiction. And they may or may not, I'm not saying which way it always comes out, believe it's not in their best interest just to say there's no such thing ever as a true transgender person.
Yeah.
They might think that in Oregon, for example, in Camille Keifel's case, that is if they believe that this is some type of campaign, against the LGBT community. And again, they don't understand the difference here. They don't understand that many in the LGBT community are way against this trans type care, right? It's a whole thing. You'd have to educate them for a week. They just
Right.
know they just know that, look, I have a patient, even following what we believe are way too liberal standards of care, they were violated, because they usually are. Because you guys know the deal. You usually see that these people go see a counselor for 40 minutes on a Zoom call, and they say, okay, yeah, you can go ahead and get your breast cut off.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't follow anybody's standard of care. And for example, in the White Plains case, Fox Varian's case, I mean, that doctor, the counselor there, even conceded that, like, even by your own doctor, well, let's argue and struggle over standard of care definition. Is it WPATH? And they might say, well, no, it's not WPATH in and of itself. And there's also an informed consent model, but that's not the one that's majority used. This is the doctor answering, rough and rough quote. And they'll say, yeah, but what about by your own standard? By your own standard, wouldn't you want to document gender dysphoria for at least 6 months or a year, right? A sustained identity before you recommended it? Yeah, by my own standard of care, yes. Do you agree that your own records don't indicate gender dysphoria? Yes, I agree that. So you agree you violated your own standard of care? Kind of, yes. And there were, I think, 4 such concessions in Fox Varian's case by the counselor before on the recommendation to the surgeon. So I know that's Jamie, I was just kind of getting back to the definition of standard of care. You can even ask their own doctor, wouldn't you agree that this should be done before you recommend surgery? Or when you're asking the surgeon, Dr. Chen, in Fox Varian's case, it's more like, do you have a duty to check with the counselor, to look at their own records, to request a file, to request the interview notes? And they may say, I have a duty to do that, or I don't. I don't think a reasonable surgeon has a duty, to go behind the scenes. I think just getting the letter is sufficient. Well, how about talking to the counselor? Do you have a duty to at least call the counselor up? That kind of thing. And they may say yes or no, probably no, unless there's a red flag in the letter, right? And in Fox Varian's case, now I know I'm going down rabbit holes here, but in Fox Varian's case, there was no specific gender dysphoria diagnosis in the letter. I'm sure y'all have read that.
Yeah.
And the excellent reporting that's been done.
Yeah.
There was no specific GD diagnosis. There was tons of indicia of body dysmorphia and tons of mention of body dysmorphia, which is a contraindication for surgery, not an indication for surgery. So the question of the doctor there is, well, doctor, how about if there's no diagnosis in your letter documentation for gender dysphoria, which is required by SOC 7? SOC 7 was the one in place at the time the surgery occurred on Fox Varian, not SOC 8. Wouldn't you agree then that you had a duty to at least call and clarify, whether there's a gender dysphoric diagnosis? And, they're either going to agree to that credibly or disagree with it. And we'd have our own expert come in, surgeon, and did say, oh, absolutely. If the gender dysphoria is not in the recommendation letter, you got to call up or you got to reject it and not do the surgery, And in Fox Varian's case, I'm just using these facts to kind of answer your question about the application of standard of care. So I'm not looking at, notes on the transcripts or anything, but you go back and check on whatever I'm saying. But Dr. Chen, for example, he on the stand said, well, if I had known this, if this had been included in the letter by the counselor, I would not have done the surgery. There were several of those. And one of them was that Fox was questioning her identity at a clinic, 4.5 months,
Yes.
I think, before the surgery?
Yeah.
Was it, what was this clinic called? It was, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The point is, the point is under, even under SOC 7 of WPATH, the person was questioning their identity, struggling, saying they felt they were being forced into this 4.5 months before the surgery. It wasn't put in the surgery letter. And Dr. Chen says, well, if I'd have known that, of course, I wouldn't have done the surgery. So those are ways you get at standard of care, right? And causation, because now that's more proof of the causation link, right? You prove through Dr. Einhorn, who it was, the PhD psychologist, that he violated the duty to document gender dysphoria. But then you got to get the doctor to say, but for, him not mentioning it, I wouldn't have done the surgery, or there's no causal link. So you have to link it. I probably used too many negatives there, but you got to link it all the way up.
Okay, I'm going to pivot for a minute. So we're talking about detransitioner or med malpractice lawsuits. But one of the things I know that you have talked about is that the jurisdiction matters for where you're bringing the case. So let me ask like a series of questions. Maybe that'll work. So can you only bring the case? You have to have some kind of tie to the jurisdiction to bring the case. So the doctor either works in that state or the surgery is performed in that state. You can't like pick your jurisdiction, but you could pick cases based on jurisdiction. And I'm going to read off a couple just like fiscal quotes real quick. So there are some states that have no medical malpractice damages caps. There's no cap on the amount of how high the med mal could go. Those states, examples are Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and Wyoming. I think, okay. Then, but then some states can have what has been referred to as nuclear verdicts, verdicts where the amount awarded is really, really high. But some states have caps. So Virginia has a medical malpractice cap of about 2.5 million. So without going into like, I don't need you to say like every state's like cap or no cap, but like that seems like it really complicates the picture for an attorney working in medical malpractice or testing or taking some of these detransitioner cases.
It's definitely a heavy influence, and I'll come back to that a little bit more at the end as to where should a lawyer be taking cases, and what is, of course, we're most influenced by the facts. All the lawyers involved in this, the plaintiffs' lawyers that you guys know, and I've mentioned a couple already, they are doing this because, as a belief system, that they very strongly believe this is a huge wrong that's been done, huge injustice.
But
So
they also have to be able to pay for their work.
But they have to get paid, and I will stress that these plaintiffs' firms are not making money. They are losing money. This is a money out the door enterprise for them, because these cases are very expensive. And
is that for now until we start getting?
Yes, until you start getting more. It's not that they're not making money on some of the cases. It's that if you get a third contingency fee, on $1 million case or $2 million case, that might keep your office afloat for 3 or 4 months or 6 months. That's it. You're not making money on that. You have to have an office, you have to have staff, you have to hire experts, you have travel expenses to go even meet with plaintiffs. It's a very expensive endeavor. So nobody's getting rich on these things yet. There's been a handful of settlements. There's been, a verdict, and there have been, some good settlements too. And part of the reason the information doesn't get out on those, of course, because it's very private, and most of the hospitals require strict confidentiality for any of the settlements that occur. That's typical. And most of the plaintiffs, they're not in it for publication. They don't want their personal stuff out there anyways. So it's usually not published. But getting back to or disclosed in any way. And I'm certainly not going to go anywhere near it. So getting back to your question about jurisdictions, there are the tort exposure world has gone crazy over the past 10 years or so, especially over the past 5 or 6 years, in which verdicts that would typically be, well, what I would call a seven-figure verdict, a $3 million or $4 million death case, just using a simple wrongful death case for a simple example, not to be harsh about it, to be not to be unsympathetic about it, but a typical case might have been $3 or $4 million. It might be, who knows now, 10, 15, 20. Some jurisdictions, Texas, California, Florida, they're getting huge verdicts. They're getting $100 million verdicts. They're getting $800 million verdicts on single plaintiff personal injury cases. I'm not saying those all stand up on appeal, but I'm saying those are verdicts that are coming out in largely those states. Georgia's had a few larger verdicts. Oregon's had a few larger verdicts. So those are typically the jurisdictions that are most dangerous for hospitals, meaning if you sue there as an injured person, that's where you're most likely to get a large nuclear type of verdict. Although nuclear verdicts are kind of appearing, you can get one anywhere now. Let me put it that way. Not as much of a risk, but you can. Generally speaking, you can look at an electoral map for the last election, and you can see the red areas for the counties are generally more conservative and will give lower verdicts, and the blue areas are generally more liberal and will get higher verdicts. But that's not totally true. I mean, Texas is largely conservative, and it gives large verdicts. So it really just kind of depends. It's a very mixed factor. It's a whole another discussion of why larger verdicts are coming out. But to answer your initial question,
are there any states where, like, if a detransitioner came forward but the awards are so small it's not even worth trying in certain states?
Oh yeah. There's some, I wouldn't say it's not worth doing, but it's not worth doing if you intend to make money.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, you look at states like California and Texas and Colorado, there are caps there. I'm not looking at my list of caps, but there are caps there could be $250,000 of general damages, meaning pain and suffering above your medical expenses. So if you suffer medical expenses because of the malpractice and projected medical expenses of 300 or 400,000, you can get that. Then there's usually a cap on top of that of general damages, pain and suffering, warm fuzzy damages that cap you. But if you've got caps that are even a $2.5 million cap, frankly, is very restrictive on a case that you think without a cap you could get $10 or $20 million on, right? So $250,000, $500,000 caps, and they also have restrictions on the fees. You only get 25% in some states, including New York, unless you petition the court of a fee. These are very restrictive. They're tort reform measures. They're intended to dissuade medical malpractice actions, and they make it difficult to bring lawsuits in those jurisdictions.
The goal was to dissuade lawsuits against providers. Do states that have those caps, does that somehow trickle into providers being more cautious? Do we have any evidence that providers are more cautious in states where there are no caps, where they could get their
I don't
to them?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the medical world, medical profession as a whole, they act responsibly and they're unaffected by the caps. I do. But
Okay.
they're in it for, good motivations, and I don't know if it's going to affect your behavior if you're operating in a state where there's lower caps. But I will say that if you're running a gender care clinic as a warehouse, you've got to be aware that you're better off doing it in California or Colorado or Texas, even oddly, than you are in Florida, where you get just whacked, for $100 million, and the court's not going to turn it over. There's no cap involved. So it's got to be in the consciousness somewhere, but I don't know how much. In other words, I'm not willing to take a broadside at the medical profession to say they act more dangerously if they're in a state with strict caps. They may financially choose to practice there because they don't want to get hit with spurious lawsuits that don't have much, a good fact pattern behind them. But it's not a viable lawsuit because the medical industry does suffer from a lot of, non-viable lawsuits being filed against the doctors that really don't have a lot of credibility. and the doctors deserve protection. I'm not saying these caps are evil in and of themselves. I'm just saying they're a real, they really dissuade a good viable lawsuit in a certain jurisdiction. And you cannot just sue wherever you want. That was your first question. You got to sue usually where the defendant is or where the wrongful act occurred. Some states allow you to sue where the plaintiff is too, but most of them are where's the defendant, where's the person you're suing, right? Where are they located? And that's venue too, by the way, because venue matters as well. You can't just, this happened in Florida, so I'm going to sue in Miami-Dade County. No. What county did it happen in?
Okay.
That you're usually, I'm not going to get into venue law, but you're usually restricted to that, to the venue where the wrongful act occurred or where the defendant resides.
Okay.
Or where the business is located. Let me put it that way.
My final big topic that I want to get into before we wrap up is about what is known as a statute of limitation. So, statute of limitations, the way that I understand it, are normally state-based. They're state law. And when people ask me about this, I say most statutes of limitations are like 1 to 3 years for like injury or for medical malpractice.
Yeah.
And that the big problem we're running up against is that most individuals harmed by gender affirming care fall well outside of this window for the statute of limitations. And so most of the data or research that we see right now is that it seems like most individuals come to realize that they were harmed by these procedures. It looks like about 7 years out, 7 to 10 years, sometimes even out. So why did what was the initial reason why we have statute of limitations to begin with? And then do you feel like this is like a special case that it needs to be carved out and laws changed just for this one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go further than that, because I'll link this up to our last conversation. I don't believe this is medical care. I don't believe it's ever been medical care, and I don't think it should be protected by the medical malpractice legislation and laws. And I think there have certainly been legislative moves afoot to say this is not medical care and it's not going to be treated as medical care. Therefore, the caps do not apply.
Fraud. So if this is not medical care, this is instead fraud.
Yeah, well, almost, yeah. Here's the unfortunate truth on that. Regardless of how you plead it in most states, whether you plead it as fraud or something else, it still gets captured and limited by the medical malpractice cap. The courts are very aware of you trying to do an end run on the med mal cap. And so even if you plead it as constructive fraud or coercion or intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligent infliction of emotional distress, it's usually, not always, it's usually still limited by the medical malpractice cap.
That's the cap. Can you, if they're aware that people try to run around the cap on damage amount, what about running or getting around the statute of limitations? And also, like, why do we have statute of limitations? Like, what is
statutes of limitations are legitimately there to protect the citizenry of the United States and the business of the United States from getting sued on something when it's old and stale and the facts can't even be gathered anymore to properly defend yourself, and to stop having litigious societies filing spurious lawsuits that don't have a good basis to them. So as a person, like if you worked on your neighbor's yard for them as a business, 2 or 3 years later, they want to give you the comfort that you're not going to be sued for doing something to him or to their property or something after 2 or 3 years. It's just, look, there's got to be an end to the point in time in which there can be liability for a tort, for you being sued. It's to provide a comfort level. They've always existed, and they exist in every state. There are different periods of time for property damage, breach of contract, fraud, personal injury, wrongful death. They can all have different years, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years. But they exist everywhere. And it again, is to dissuade litigation that shouldn't be brought. And the same thing with statutes of repose, which are similar to statutes of limitations, but I don't know if we need to get into statutes of repose. But the point is that they legitimately exist, but they are poorly designed for, as we began this conversation, for this kind of tort. This is a new kind of tort where the person cannot know they were harmed or even know the degree of the harm, right? Or even the nature of the harm until just very recently, even. Because they're told, as Lauren brought up earlier, they're told it's treatment. They're told it's part of the cure. So that's a very unique situation. So statutes of limitations, just to go back to the basics, they limit the amount of time after which you cannot sue. Most of them are most states are 2 years for personal injury, but it could be 1, it could be 3, or 2 years for personal injury, wrongful death. That after 2 years after the harm occurs, which is usually really easy, you're in a car wreck, you got 2 years to file suit after the car wreck.
Okay.
You fall down the stairs, you get hit in the head with something. It's 2 years. But but you can see how awkwardly that applies to gender affirming gender. The fact that each word of that is deceptive answers the question as to why they can't figure out they've been harmed. I mean, the whole phrase is deceptive, and each phrase is a lie. It's not care. There's no reality in the gender thing, and it's not affirming anything. So it's all deception, I believe. And so statute of limitations in these cases are to answer your question, it's more than 9 out of 10. We interview so many people and talk to so many detransitioners, and I know you do too at these events. I mean, at these events, when there's 30 detransitioners standing there for a picture, or 40 detransitioners like there was in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago, almost all of those people, personally, I'm sure, their lawsuits are barred. They don't have a chance. They don't have a lawyer. They can't get a lawyer to file their lawsuit because it happened 7 years ago or 6 years ago. And there's also something, just before you say it, that's called, I do have to get into statutes of repose. That's called it's called statute of repose. Statute of repose might be 3 years after, in any event, 3 years after a surgery occurs, you can't bring suit, or 5 years after a surgery. No matter what, no matter if you discovered the harm 10 years later or not, if they have a discovery rule, no matter if something doesn't come to light for 6 years, no matter if you were 12 when it happened, and so you should have until age 20 to bring a lawsuit, 2 years after majority, usually. No, if it's 5 years after the surgery, statute of repose, regardless of anything else, stops lawsuits from happening, actually extinguishes the cause and the right of action. Statutes of repose are absolute. Statutes of limitation are procedural in nature, and sometimes you can get around them. Sometimes there are ways. The main way is a continuing care exception. If you're under that same doctor's continuing care for years who committed the malpractice, then the statute might not run, depending on the state law and the facts, until after the care terminates, after you leave that person's care. Or if you've been defrauded, right, and you've been lied to about, you go back to the doctor and you say, hey, the surgery you did is causing all these issues. And they say, no, that's not right. We checked it out and it's fine. You've been defrauded. That can be something that tolls the statute of limitations, such that you can bring an action after 2 years. But really that's minutia. The biggest point here is that almost all of the gender affirming care lawsuits, potential lawsuits, are barred by statutes of limitations. Even the good ones. And even if you look at all the cases now that are pending, and I know you guys followed the lawsuits, all of them that are out there, whether Soren Aldico's, Prisha Mosley's, Amanda Stewart's up on hearings now, right, in New Hampshire on this issue. Camille Keifel had severe statute of limitations issues. Kaiser, you have statute of limitations issues on Breen's case, right, was dismissed for statute. Even the lawsuits that are brought where we're like, we think we have a good case here to get around the statute of limitations. We'll say we, I'm not the lawyer in all those cases. And by the way, I was not the lawyer. I didn't mean to say I was at all, or advising in Fox Varian's case in New York. I was there. I observed a lot of the testimony, along with Josh Payne and Daniel Sepulveda from the Campbell Miller Payne firm. But I'm not counsel of record on that case, so I know I talked about it a lot, so I want to pretend like it was. But I did watch it, and I followed it, and I watched those doctors testify, and I have opinions about it. Anyways, getting back to that, it is by far the largest stumbling block. Even in Prisha Mosley's case in North Carolina, where the legislature came out and extended the statute of limitations to 10 years, the trial court still dismissed her case, saying, whatever, I'm not going to allow you to amend the lawsuits. It's in my discretion to allow you to amend the lawsuit, plaintiffs. I'm going to deny it. That's up on appeal. So we've had one case go to trial, right, on the merits, and that was Fox Varians, and you saw what the jury did on that. And I think they could have easily added a 0 to that, and it was just lucky that for those doctors that a 0 wasn't added to it. I think that easily could have been a $20 million verdict, on my experience.
Okay, here's my 2 follow-up questions on statute of limitations. So one of them, it was very interesting that you brought up that the provider has to be able to defend themselves. So if you're bringing up something that happened a decade ago, it made me immediately think of, I used to run a medical clinic. And in the state where I was running that clinic, there was a 7-year requirement that we had to keep this was back when we had paper records. But there was a 7-year requirement for a paper record. So once a year, I actually had to instruct my staff to purge through all the patients who had not been seen physically on site in 3 years. Then we moved all of those records to storage. And then we had this intricate system so that at the 7-year mark, these paper records could be destroyed.
Yeah.
This was we didn't have computerized medical records at that point. So it did make me realize there is a question of, you want cases to go forward, but you don't want to be the one being sued and have no mechanism with which to protect yourself. So has something changed now that we have electronic medical records? Are these records now safer or kept longer?
Yeah, I don't know what the record retention requirements are for medical practices now. That is highly regulated, that industry, of course, and that's going to be in the regulations. 7 years, by the way, is the rule for almost any business, because the IRS can audit you, civil liability up to 3 years back, criminal liability up to 6 or 7 years back for tax fraud. So you're advised to keep records going back 7 years or so in regular business industry. Medical, of course, is way different, because actually, the patient owns the medical records. They own their own medical records, not the hospital. So I would think that with current electronic storage, that's not an issue anymore. No.
Okay, and then one more
but it's not. But that's not the only rationale for it. The rationale can be witnesses die and go away and stuff too. There's a rational reason for a statute of limitations.
I mean,
It just really awkwardly applies to gender affirming care cases. That's all.
Okay, my other question. This has come up a few times, but it sounds like you just answered it though. But part of it also isn't it that you get some sort of a window for when your harm was actually discovered? And when you mentioned that about repose and surgery, weren't there cases where individuals had surgery and a surgical tool or a surgical sponge was left behind, and the person didn't realize that this abdominal abscess or this physical pain that they were enduring for years, they didn't realize that what had happened was this tool was left behind. So is there no recourse? It sounds like when that repose is up, it's done. It doesn't matter if you find
it's done. I will say, I'll put an asterisk on this, because I know that many states, I don't know if I can say most, many states have an exception for foreign objects left in the body during surgery.
Okay. But when you discover
one of the exceptions is, but maybe this is analogous to gender affirming care. Maybe you're right to bring it up, because one of the exceptions is you don't have to hire an expert to prove. It's basically called strict liability. You don't have to hire an expert to prove that was a breach of the standard of care that they left a scalpel in the body or a clamp. Usually,
you wouldn't need to get an expert to say we take the clamps out, but yes.
Right. You don't need an expert. But, usual medical malpractice, you would need to get an expert and go through the expense of that, and that it caused all this issue. So, yeah, in foreign body cases, a lot of states have exceptions to that. And they might have exceptions for statute of repose. I'm not sure. They might not. Statutes of repose are pretty draconian. There's no analysis of justice.
Okay, so then just way big picture. If if we have okay, without legislative intervention, many detransitioners are going to be time barred. And it looks like even when we are creating new laws around legislative interventions, many detransitioners will still not be grandfathered into those. If you, I think you would say we still have a strong case to be made for the use of lawsuits to help bring this down. Does that mean we keep trying to find the non-time barred detrans cases? Does that mean we talk to patients, people who seem to be having regrets like sooner? Or, where do you see a pathway forward for this?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think you still have to ferret out those that have been harmed by gender affirming care. Look, especially minors, but as you know, there's a lot of people of majority who are very vulnerable, have suffered, barely competent or incompetent, and have suffered this wrong of care. And I think they should be analyzed the same as a minor, because I think the issue is vulnerability. How vulnerable was the person? How susceptible were they to suggestion? How screwed up were they in the head? Autism, depression, ADD, all the stuff, multiple personality disorder. So I think it's vulnerability. And I think that these there are enough exceptions to statutes of limitations, even if there's no legislation, where they each need to be looked at. There are specific facts to each case. There's discovery rules that can make the statute of limitations longer. There's continuing treatment rules that can make the statute of limitations longer. There's our attempts to educate the court on what true harm and wrongdoing is in these cases. It was just argued in Breen. If you look at the case law, the cases in Breen and the California law, there's a lot of argument about that. Judge's decision this past summer. So, I think it's very worthwhile doing, because I think there's a large number of people out there that are still within the statute of limitations. I will also say, though, the biggest help for new lawsuits would be, because your question was kind of twofold, that if there is legislation that expands statute of limitations to 10 years or 30 years, there would be a lot more plaintiffs. Even if, because I hate to get into this distinction now, but if it's a statute of limitations that's already expired and a new law is passed that there's a 30-year statute of limitations, that person's not time barred. They can still bring suit, because statutes of limitations are procedural. If this, and we would argue against this, but there's a better argument for defendants statute of repose, because statute of repose extinguishes a cause of action. So if you're past the 5 years, for example, the action's extinguished. So if a legislature comes in and puts a longer statute of limitations in, arguably, it does not revive it. There are arguments that it will. I'm just saying the arguments that defendants will make. So it's much more clear in non-statute of repose states, or in cases in which statute of repose has not expired on the alleged wrongful care, that 30-year statute of limitations would allow thousands more people, no question, to seek justice and at least try to get their day in court, to put the doctor, to a jury to say, did you mistreat me? Did you commit malpractice here? Did you not tell me what the risks were? Or did you deceive me? So that would be, I think, what is required. It's much longer statute of limitations, and or saying this is not medical care. If you say this is not medical care, then that would be the largest thing.
Okay, Kevin, this has been fascinating. I have a tiny request for you. I know that there's going to be more detransitioner lawsuits that are going to be reported on coming up in the future. I would love to be able to have you come back and kind of walk us through some of those cases as they continue to move forward.
Sure.
But this has been really helpful, at least for me. I think I'm going to keep mulling over
Yeah.
what a standard of care is.
Yes. I
That's the
think
one.
we'll all keep mulling over that.
Yeah.
It's happened since the beginning of time. The article. The Ben writes very
I
excellent
do.
articles on this. Leor Sapir does. There's excellent people discussing these issues. The Christian Post has excellent articles out on it. So there's excellent, and Epoch Times has some too. I forget that gentleman's name. He was at the trial as well. But
Oh, is it Yannick?
no, I'm so bad with names.
That's
I'm
okay.
so he the I don't know how you say it, Epoch, I guess, or Epic Times has excellent series of articles on it as well that talk about a lot of these issues. And anyways, both Ben and he are excellent. Stacy, I believe, both Ben and Stacy are outstanding writers and discuss some of these items. And Leor Sapir is big brain that discusses it as well. So they all have excellent stuff on it. Problem is, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a wordsmith. So when I start to talk about it, I kind of seize up a little bit. I
Oh,
should be a
actually,
word. I should be
we've
a
got
wordsmith as a lawyer. We need
we've got the
writers. We
other
need people
lawyers.
who think about it and can frame it correctly as to what the harm is. And we need the government to get involved. We need attorneys general to start bringing, consumer protection type actions and uncovering, just the way you were a whistleblower. Once we can get, shine a light on these actual medical records from these facilities, hopefully with the aid of attorneys general nationally, I think it will also give rise to a lot more lawsuits and a lot more litigation.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. And yeah, we would love to have you back at some point. Have a
Love
great day.
to. Y'all do great work. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on Informed Dissent. And thank you, Kevin Kellar, for joining us as our guest. Kevin came in and helped us understand something that matters enormously right now, how the law actually works and how it can be used on behalf of the people it was always supposed to protect. We're grateful for his time. Earlier in today's episode, I asked sincerely if anyone knows of a podcast from the other side of this debate that is engaging with our content or similar content in a way that we try to engage with theirs. I'm still going to repeat this ask because if it exists, I genuinely want to know about it. Because what we are trying to do with this show is something I believe is rare. We are trying to have adult conversations, real engagement with the evidence, with some humor. Yes, well, because you can't have Cori Cohn without a little bit of humor, and Lauren too. But no dismissiveness, no shortcuts. And when I listen to the voices on the other side, and I do listen, what I most often hear is that we are simply right-wing bigots, that we are hateful or stupid or acting in bad faith. What I almost never hear is actual engagement with the argument. I would be sincerely, genuinely curious to watch Kellan Baker, who we heard from in the WPATH footage today, sit down and seriously consider the positions of someone like Cori Cohn or Lauren Leggieri. Not to debate, but just to consider them. I think that would be very hard to do. And I think that the reason it would be hard to do has something to do with what we discussed towards the end of our first part. And next week, when we turn to Chase Strangio, I think that this is going to follow through. The conflict of interest that is running through so much of the advocacy on the other side, and how we are, in essence, holding up a mirror. And when that mirror is there, it is revealing back something to these individuals that is very hard for them to deal with, to grapple with. I think it's just much easier to call us all bigots. But we're not going anywhere, and neither are these questions. And I'll also say this. Anytime we discuss someone on our show, Kellan Baker, Chase Strangio, anyone, we are extending an invitation in advance. We want them to come on and to have a conversation with us. We want to hear it, and the offer is real. There are other shows in this space, but I want to name something, the one thing that I feel like makes us different. We're not going to build this show on the suffering of the people that we're fighting for. We're not going to bring in harmed individuals and place them in front of the microphone and ask them to relive it for your consumption, because we're not going to send the wounded back out on the front line. What we do instead, what we try to do every week, is find the adults who are holding the line on their behalf.
That's why we're pulling forward these lawyers and researchers and clinicians and advocates and journalists, and we talk to them. This is a choice that we've deliberately made from the onset, and we're going to keep making it. But this is where you actually start to come in. If this show is useful to you, if it has helped you think or given you something to share, we want you to subscribe. It's completely free to do so. It costs you nothing at all. But when every single person who listens subscribes to us on Substack, you're going to continue to push our numbers up. And what that means is every time we reach out to Chase, every time we reach out to Kellan, and we say, come join our show, and it has become a show that they've actually heard about, that makes this conversation harder and harder for them to ignore. That's how we get to the table, and that's how you get to hear those real conversations. So please like, share, subscribe, and tell someone who's still on the fence. Tell someone who thinks, oh, they're all right-wing bigots, to just come listen to us and hear that we're really not. Anyway, as you know, please stay informed and ready to dissent.